when I was reading an article on a relatively new website that was set up by the former media editor of The Guardian, Jim Waterson, about something pretty gross that I'll share with you in more detail shortly, my ears or eyes pricked up when I saw that the River Brent was affected. But I was already engrossed because it's a story, even in the context of the era of the Feargal, the era of Feargal-Sharkey, when we spend more time talking about the state of our waterways than we have at any other point in living memory, and quite rightly so. This story is absolutely gross, and it was the lead story on last week's London-centric newsletter, which is the media organisation. Well, tell us, Jim Waterson, if you would, first of all, a little bit about London-centric.
Well, London-centric is my attempt to try and do a bit of old-fashioned local journalism and do investigative journalism rather than just churning out lots of pieces. So go in depth, find out things about the capital, but often they've got a bit of national resonance, like this one.
And of course, that you could easily have people doing the same sort of stuff in other big cities. It's about, as you say, digging into the stories a little bit further than you can when you're on an algorithmic treadmill demanding that you get levels of engagement. Anyway, we digress. This story is hideous.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We got a pre-lunch slot here, so it's an unfortunate time slot, but it's all about people have heard about the idea of sewage seeping into our rivers, and they think, okay, when it rains, the treatment plant gets overwhelmed and your local water company says they've got no choice but to release a load of sewage.
Yes.
What I hadn't appreciated until I was approached by some people who are working on the Brent, your river, and the Crane, a neighbouring one in London, is that there's this issue of misconnections where people's domestic properties are basically plumbed straight into their local stream and river and are just seeping sewage the whole time. And one of the campaigners I spoke to, he said it was a bit like the difference between a short, sharp shock and a constant poisoning. And it's just a sort of one of those scandals that's probably just been in plain sight for decades, but people are only just wising up to.
Well, thanks to you and the whistleblowers who came to you, because I confess, when I read it the first time, I thought, he's found one flat somewhere where a dodgy plumber has hooked up the toilet to the wrong pipe and it's all been pumped straight into the local river. But of course, one flat will be in a building of 30 flats, and you find more than one building, and suddenly you've got what looks like a massive problem. And to be clear, that's what happens. It's plumbing, either by accident or design, that is pumping waste into the wrong pipe. And the pipe is linked directly to a local river or a local waterway.
Yeah, I mean, in really simple terms, we've all got two sets of sewers and drains outside our house. You've got one for your foul stuff and one for your rainwater that comes out the gutters. And in a lot of blocks of flats, and there's 7 we've identified in this story, we've pictured them, we've named them, we've been to every single one. We've even waded in the outflows on the river to check that they're actually flowing. This is proper muckraking journalism. But I couldn't resist it, I'm sorry. But the work that they've done on the Brent and the Crane to do this is incredible. And what it shows is that across London, probably across the whole country, are blocks of flats where, whether through ignorance or cost cutting, the builders have basically plumbed the foul bit into the bit that flows directly without being treated into the local river.
Would it save money? I mean, is it more likely to be accidental or incompetence as opposed to corruption or
a bit of that, or someone's built an extension and they've just gone for the easiest pipe that they could find, or they've not known what they're doing. But there's also an austerity element here, which is that it's up to the local councils to enforce the standards. For once, it's not the privatised water companies that are to blame here. Are the local councils sending enough people to check on new building work to make sure it's been done right, and then to tell the building owners to fix it? And it's a really, really big problem. I think this might just end up being one of those scandals that you hear about on something like this first, and then in a year's time it's everywhere.
No, that's why you're here. And oddly, I hope you're wrong, because you don't want the rivers and waterways of the country to be routinely receiving unscheduled and unwanted packages of human waste. But obviously, if you're right, then we wanted to get in early on this. Did you encounter a sort of a guru type figure who has been aware of this for ages and then sort of said, Mr. Waterson, I've been expecting you?
Well, there's a couple of guys, particularly Rob Gray and Ben Morris, who've been working on the rivers of West London, who've done a lot of the legwork on this to bring it to the public's awareness. And they have been doing things called outfall safaris. They literally get in their waders and they go up and down the rivers going, bit suspicious what's coming out of that pipe.
So you'll see, for example, wipes, usually nappies, and because some of the stuff that we produce can dissolve and walk away, and you may be suspicious of the smell or the colour, but some of the stuff that doesn't break down and biodegrade is almost certainly proof that it's come from a toilet.
Unfortunately, as much as the wet wipe creates a fatberg, it's also a quite good tracking device, is
Yes.
what they concluded. So while this might sound quite repulsive...
Like a form of poo sticks.
I mean, literal poo sticks. But and it's funny because we all giggle at this. It is gross.
Yes.
It's a horrible thing in so many ways. But it's also about taking a bit of responsibility for, is your property polluting the local waterway? You've got that nice stream at the end of the hill near your house. But have you ever known whether or not the builder who built it has actually done the right job in the first place?
And that's why it's such a splendid piece of journalism, because it throws up questions that I wasn't expecting, which would include, what do you do if you live in a place, it's not your fault, and someone comes knocking on your door from London Centric and tells you that your flat, your whole block is I mean, I don't want to pay. I can't afford to pay. I've got enough problem with service charge. So you're not actually going to be greeted with joy by the people whose lives you're minded to improve in a way.
Absolutely. Last week we were going across the capital, knocking on doors and going, look, I'm really sorry, but did you know that your flat's putting raw sewage into the local stream? And you wouldn't be surprised to find out people were not chuffed, and if they did know about it, they're facing potentially thousands or tens of thousands of pounds of bills to put it right. And in a slow way, in a sort of strange way, a bit like with the cladding crisis, a bit like with these ones where there's just not been enforcement on an issue for a very long time, where something's been allowed to build up, you could see this as one of those crises where people suddenly end up with houses that are harder to shift on the open market, or where enforcement isn't happening, or they end up with big bills just because it turns out that pipe hidden in the ground is plugged into the wrong bit of the network.
And where does the buck stop? I mean, you mentioned that councils have a duty of oversight, but it's too late in a way by the time that the wrong pipe has been connected. Whose responsibility is it to undo this damage?
Well, there's a lot of buck passing, but fundamentally it's probably either the freehold owner or the residents of the block of flats or the domestic property. And we've named 7 big blocks of flats containing hundreds of homes. Those are the easy ones to track down because, frankly, there's a lot of people in them. All these domestic properties, all these individual houses are much harder to track down. So I think this is going to turn out. And if, I was listening to you earlier talking about the stories that the Mail chooses to put on its front page. I can assure you, I think that your listeners will be hearing a lot more of this story in the coming months as more and more news outlets realise just how big a scandal this is.
And do we have an indication of how much damage it does compared to, for example, those unavoidable moments of heavy rainfall where the pipes are opened?
I think it's this idea of a constant low-level poisoning.
Yeah.
I was wading through a stream called the Silk Stream, which feeds the Brent, which flows to your house, and I'm afraid, whenever you're walking along that river, what I've seen going in at the very top of it is not something you'd really want to look at.
Oof. How can people find out more, just about London Centric in particular, and then of course this story in general?
Well, if they look up London Centric on their favourite web browser or search engine, they'll find it, and this is the top story right now, so they can have a read through it.
And it's congratulations, by the way, on not just this story, but on taking the plunge, if you pardon the pun, and whether you're wearing waders or not, on taking the plunge and trying to rewrite the rules of journalism.
Thanks very much, James. That's very kind of you.
It's really good to see you, Jim. Take care. 12 noon is the time. London Centric, as you'd expect. .media, or just do a search, as Jim says, for London Centric, all one word.